I'd like to introduce now our speakers for today. Our first speaker today is Marike Kluyts. She's been teaching English in various capacities as a tutor, facilitator, and lecturer since 2008. In these positions, she tutored and lectured on literature and linguistics courses and facilitated English second language acquisition courses. She studied literature, and her passion for language and the written word led her to pursue a career in tertiary education. And she currently holds the position of Academic Skills Coordinator in the Faculty of Science at Wits University. And we're very pleased to have her with us today. Our second speaker today is Caz McNamara. She is currently the manager of the DSI-NRF Centre of Excellence in Mathematical and Statistical Sciences, otherwise known as CoE-MaSS, and was previously manager of the DSI-NICIS National e-Science Teaching and Training Platform. And these are both multi-university collaborative projects. Caz also managed the developments of the multi-disciplinary Sydney Brenner Institute in Molecular Bioscience and has served on numerous conference local organising committees. So we're very pleased to have them joining us today. And I'd like to hand over now to our first speaker. So Marike, thank you very much.
Thank you, Diane. Morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today. So what we are going to do today is we're just going to look at how to build our own brand and looking at CV writing. So first of all, I want you to think of yourself as kind of a brand. It feels strange maybe to say these types of things, but in the end, you are trying to sell yourself to a certain degree to whoever you are applying for, or to a recruiter, or whatever the case might be. So just like with a brand, and if you think of successful brands, and it can be anything from Netflix to BMW to McDonald's, it doesn't matter. They do something. They position themselves in a certain way so that they can share something with their people, to say that in some way we can solve a problem for you. So the same should be true for yourself when you are applying for a job. That CV you are handing in isn't just something that tells them exactly what you can do. It should be a little bit more than that. It should be, what problems can I solve for you? Remember, if you look at the job ad that you are applying for, you'll see that they are asking for certain things, that you should be able to perform certain acts. Those are the problems they want you to solve. So it's really very good to think of yourself in that way. So in what way can you solve a problem? And in that way you position yourself as a brand. So I know there are still people coming in. So while that is happening, I'm just gonna talk a little bit more about this. But what I want us to do in the end is we are going to go into breakout rooms now, and we are going to talk about creating an elevator pitch. So technically what we're going to do is we're going to try and sell ourselves to the people in the group with us for 30 seconds. So what we would like you to do is to jot down things that you would like to use to sell yourself. And I know it might be difficult right now to do it because you don't maybe have a job ad in front of you. You're not applying for a job just yet, but think about it. If you had to apply for a certain job, maybe your dream job, even if it's a completely fictional job, how would you sell yourself to that place, to that corporation or institution or whatever it is you want to do? I want you to go think a little bit beyond saying that I am hardworking and committed and task-oriented and I get the job done. Not because I don't think you can do those things, because everyone else, when they write their CV, also puts down those things. So it doesn't make you kind of stand out above the rest. So think about things that are important to you. Think about things that, like I said, it's difficult because you're not, you don't have a job ad right now, but think about the things that people would like to see in an application. For instance, for my current position, I work with students. I'm in a support service. It's my duty to help students with academic literacies, to teach them and empower them to become better writers. So my elevator pitch, if I had to give one, wouldn't necessarily be about my skills in being a good writer, because I don't want to, I'm not applying for a job where I have to be a good writer. I have to be a good writing teacher. So what makes me a good writing teacher is the question I should ask myself. And then should ask yourself, okay, so to be a good, whatever it is that you are applying for, in my case, a writing teacher, I need to be accessible to people. I need to be very humane. I need to be reachable. I need to be able to explain things in certain ways. And those are the types of things then you take into your elevator pitch. Your passion, your empathy, these are the things that worked for me when I did my elevator pitch. So for yourself, what would be those things that you need to show to your or potential employer that you would like to share with them? So we're going to go into breakout rooms now. I want you to jot down, like just bullet, the words and so forth that you would like to do. And then in the breakout rooms, each one of you will have 30 seconds to do your elevator pitch to each other. And there will be a little bit of time for feedback. It's not going to be a lot. We're going to do this for 5 minutes now. And then we're going to come back into the main room. Okay, great stuff. So keep that elevator pitch that you have on hand. We're going to return to it a little later today. So yeah, let's get going. So what we have to remember when we look at our CVs is that there's different purposes for it. For us as job applicant, we should see it as a marketing tool. We're trying to sell ourselves. We're trying to say, we are better, or I am better than the 50 or 100 or how many other CVs that has landed in this pile with me. And then, of course, the opposite of that is for the recruiter or the employer. It is a screening device. It tells them certain things about yourself, like your employment and education history, your performance, your work experience, etc. And then later on, they use it as something in your personnel file and also as an interview tool. So they might return back to your CV and say, okay, you said you could do X, Y, and Z. Give us examples of how and where you did that. So remember that whatever you put in your CV, they might ask you about that. So make sure you can do that. Then for you, the CV allows you to make a good first impression. So with that, layout and spelling and grammar and all of those things are very important, because especially in the age we are living in now, typed communication via emails, etc., is quite important. So if you can't communicate who you are in your written CV, how should they trust you to communicate important information via email or reports or whatever the case might be? So it's also important for you when you do your CV to highlight your credentials and your suitability for the post. I'll get back to that in a little bit. And then your CV gives your employer a snapshot of who you are. So it's kind of, they want to see a rounded person. If you do volunteer work, what type of volunteer work do you do? What type of hobbies and those types of things do you do, especially these types of things become very important, especially in the era we are living in now, where the lines between your work and personal life are blurring a lot, so that they want you to also, of course, be well, because if your well-being and you are feeling stressed and burned out, then you can't do your job properly. So with these types of things, we also demonstrate that. So the reality, unfortunately, that we have to face when we do apply is that they get many applications. So your application has to stand out in some way. One way, of course, to do it is to make a good visual presentation of your CV. Because if you look at a pile of CVs, the one that has an interesting layout usually catches your eye. And then you have to remember that going through your CV is time consuming, especially for employers when they do get 100 or 120 or 150 or how many ever applications. They have to go through each one of those CVs. So don't bury anything in your CV. Don't let them find the best for last type of thing, because they're not going to read it from first word to last word ever. A CV is usually scanned. So they scan through it, look for keywords, key ideas. So in that way, for that reason, it's important to align your CV with the job application, the job ad, sorry. So look at the keywords and that's in there, the things that they would like you to do, see whether you have experience in something that is exactly that or similar to that, and then rephrase it in your CV. So I'm already hinting at the fact that creating one CV and then sending it to everyone isn't going to cut it. Because everyone you are applying for will ask something different from you. So you have to highlight the skills that they are asking for. So you will always tinker with each one of your CVs that you send in later. It might not be a thing in South Africa yet, but some of you might decide to apply for international companies, wherever the case might be. So then another thing you have to remember is, because it's so time consuming to work through CVs, a lot of them use software applications to scan through the CVs to find the keywords, and then that goes into kind of the next process where it is then seen by human beings. So if you don't have those keywords, those pointers in your CV, the machine, of course, won't pick it up, and then your CV won't even go to the next stage, even though you might be very qualified to do that job. Like I said, visual input is very important. First impressions count. So if you have a very untidy CV with freaky line spacing and weird texts and fonts and things, people aren't going to take you seriously. So those things are very important. And then relevance is important. So no matter how nice your CV looks, it has to be relevant to the job ad. And then a second question you have to ask yourself when you do look at a job ad is whether you would want to do the job, not whether you can do the job. That I would like to do. These are the questions you have to ask yourself as well. And then, of course, if you feel it's not going to help you grow, then it does sting sometimes, but then you have to pass it by. It's not going to be for you. So your goal is to produce a relevant CV. So you can do that by first, if you don't have a kind of a working CV yet, you can start to explore the details of your education and work life. So just list down things like names and dates and places, your accomplishments and those types of things. The accomplishments will become a lot more relevant when you are looking at industry type of jobs. So instead of saying you published X amount of papers, you have to start thinking about the skills that you had to master and the things you had to accomplish, kind of the outputs. that was part of that paper or your research project or whatever. Because in industry, they're not going to, they're like, okay, great, you have a PhD or a master's or whatever, but can you do these things? So in which ways have you acquired these other types of skills throughout your academic career? So start thinking about those types of accomplishments as well. Then after you've done all of that, you match your list with the job ad and see what you have done. Does it translate? Does it link to what is happening in industry? Or if you're applying for an academic position, how does it link to that as well? So then you have to present the material in a way that holds the attention of your audience. So that means you have to know who you are writing for. And I know we're steamrolling through all of these, but if you have any questions, please jot them down and you can ask me about it in the Q&A session. So with an audience analysis, it only means, what it technically means is you have to know who you are writing for. You are writing to someone, whether hypothetically it's myself or Caz or whoever it might be, somebody's going to read your CV. So what is very important is to go do research. Now, you guys are all academics, so you are not strangers to research. So the same is true here. When you are applying for a job, just go potter around on the website of the place you are applying for. What is their mission and vision? What is their values? What is their stance? What do they want to accomplish? Does it align with what you want to accomplish or not? These things are important, not just for the company, but for yourself as well. If you are going to go work at a place where their values are in stark opposition to your own values, you're going to be unhappy there. So these questions are not just about how can I mold myself into fitting into what they want. It is also asking the question of whether I would be happy working there at all or not. Okay, so also look at what other types of things they are doing, whether they're doing community projects, conservation, education drives. If you are already doing volunteer or charity work, that then immediately speaks to them in a certain way. So check that out. So there are 3 main CV formats, and to say that they are the end all and be all is actually false, but they're a good place to start. So the chronological one is the most traditional CV format. It's mostly used in the academe and in corporates. This present of the seminar, Caz is going to unpack a more traditional academic CV with you guys. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about it here. But what you should remember about it is reverse chronological order. So what you did most recently comes first and everything kind of after that. And what's good about this type of CV, it shows a solid work history. So then you get a functional CV. I'll show you examples of each one of these in a bit, so don't worry. Functional CV focuses on your skill set. So this is usually the CV that is used by people who have either gaps in their employment history, mixed employment background, or haven't worked yet. So it might be some of you who have studied most of your life, now you have to start applying for a job and you don't really have that solid work history, then you can use a functional CV because it focuses on skills. So remember in one of the previous slides, I said you had to start looking at your accomplishments and kind of how you got there. So if you had to lead a project, so then you can talk about management or project leads or those types of skills. So even though you didn't have a job where you were a project manager, you do have that skill set because you had to use it in your academic career in a project that you were working in to do those types of things. And then you also get a combined CV. This is actually the one I like to use, but that's a preference thing. It doesn't mean it's the best one, because it highlights specific work experience and it highlights skills and talents, and it can be very much tailored to what you need to do. So here's an example of a chronological one, the more traditional one. So you start with your contact info at the top, your qualifications, work experience, etc. And if you have any other certifications or anything else that you would like to share, you share that at the bottom. Then the functional format. So remember I asked you guys to do the elevator pitch. So those bullets that you've written down there, you can start to rework into a profile, a little blurb about yourself that you put at the top of your CV. That kind of highlights things that if they look at your degree, that might not jump out at them. So that's where you're going to put those types of things in. And here you will see this person might not have a lot of work experience, but or formal work experience. So they've decided to do the more functional thing, where they I have experience in leading and coaching, communication, project management, etc. And then in that way, you highlight the skills that you had. Or that you have, you didn't lose them. Then the combination format, you also have a professional profile that you can use that elevator pitch for. Here you'll see that the person has indicated key industry skills. So, and that way it's already started to form what they can do, aligning it to the job ad. And it's actually making it very easy for whoever is looking at the CV to find the important things in your CV. Like I said, if there's a pile of 100 or 200, they're not going to read your CV from start to finish. They're going to scan it and look for certain things. So by using these types of headings, you make it easier for them to find your work. Okay. Then further sections, like I said, it's not this is how it should be and this is the end. It's very flexible. So other things that you can add to any one of these three types of CVs is awards and recognitions, any professional affiliations you belong to, publications, presentations. If you have patents, well done, put that in as well. Endorsements, other skills, and then your references. So your goal is to be as neat as possible. So choose a professional design and use text and colors that are easy to read. So because we are living in a very technologically driven age, even if you go into a Word document and just type in CV templates, it will throw out a bunch of templates for you. So if you don't want to start from scratch, some of you might have more of a design flair and would like to do something on Canva, which is also freeware that you can find on the internet to do your own layout, or do it on Microsoft Publisher or whatever the case might be. But as long as it looks professional, that's all that matters. So these are just my suggestions. Again, there's no hard and fast rule about how big fonts and so forth should be, but your name should kind of pop. They should know they're reading Rachel or Nelson or Lennon's CV. So put that at the top in a bigger font. Headings also a bit bigger. Subheadings smaller, and then your body text 10 to 12 text points. Use easy to read formats like Arial, Calibri, etc. And then don't put anything in all caps. Everyone feels that if you type in all caps, you're yelling at them. So if you want to use something like bold, do it sparingly, maybe as a subheading, way to differentiate the text, but don't put everything in bold. Then finally, color. Main text is always black. It's best. If you are using an accent color, use one that doesn't dominate. So maybe not a fuchsia pink or a canary yellow. and also those don't print actually quite well if somebody decides to print your CV in black and white. My personal preference, again, it's a personal preference, is greens and blues. I feel they're also quite tranquil. So if I receive a red CV, I might feel like, this person is going to challenge me in some way, or that it's, going to not be something that I would like to do. So I like I said, personal preference, prefer greens and blues for accent colors. So just a general tip for layout, if we look here, these two CVs include the same information, but the one on the right, in my opinion, displays better because it has kind of areas, it has layout, there's white space. White space is your friend in a CV if everything is wall-to-wall text. Just think about when you are reading an article or a textbook or whatever, and everything is just wall-to-wall text. You're just like, oh, I don't want to read this. And people who are reading bunches of CVs feel the same. So kind of give them white space to breathe and get into your CV. And that's it. So note, there are certain things that should always be in your CV, but the way you order them in your CV depends on you. And yeah, that is it from my side. So do you have any questions for me?
Thank you very much, Marike. Yeah, so guys, if you can please raise your hand to ask a question. I'm going to put some instructions in the chat just to remind everyone. And I'll keep track of who's asking. I might kick us off, if that's okay, Marike.
Yes.
Just a quick question from my side. You mentioned other skills to list. I don't want to be awkward. Like, can you give me an example? So would like volunteering be a skill, or is that something else?
Yeah, so volunteering would rather be kind of something that you do. So another type of, I don't want to call it a hobby, but I would rather place it in that type of thing. So skills, what I mean with skills, that's a very good question. Thank you for asking, is more kind of your technical skills. So what can you technically do? If you can do certain lab experiments or develop certain types of computer programming or neural networks or whatever the case might be. So there's those technical skills, but also your more soft skills, like things like communication, problem solving skills. Those types of things are also important for employers. And then what else? I had one in my head that I thought should also be in there. So things also like teamwork and work ethic and those types of things might also be useful as skills. And again, because we are working in a very technologically driven age, it might also be good to list what type of software packages you are very comfortable with. If you can do stuff in R or SPSS, or you're very competent in Word and Excel, Microsoft package stuff, those types of skills would also be good for them to see.
Oh, great. Thank you so much. That really does answer my question. We've got a raised hand from Celine from WITS. Celine, if you want to unmute and turn on your video and go ahead.
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Hi, Celine.
I just wanted to ask, if we have work experience that isn't like exactly relevant to the job, so like for instance, I was a promotion girl, it's not really relevant to like conservation, but I did learn stuff like communication and like sales and like, you know, things like that. Would you put that into the CV, or would you just like pick out the skills?
Yeah, so I would pick out the skills. It also kind of depends where you are applying for. Industry CVs are usually shorter. People just kind of want the bare, not the bare minimum, but kind of the most important gist of it. academic CVs can be quite lengthy. So in an academic CV, I would say put it as the job, you know, that you've had at the bottom, but maybe for an industry CV, because they usually want it to be 2 or so pages, it might not fit in, but just add the skills that you have acquired.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Sure.
Great, thanks, Celine. I'd like to invite the next person. We've got no raised hands. Essie Bosman from WITS. Please go ahead.
Hello. I just wanted to ask, with regards to making a CV, is it a good idea to put a photo of yourself on your CV?
Well, again, I actually have no problem with it. I prefer it for some other reason. For me, when I look at a CV, it humanizes it. I've had a photo on my CV for the last 4 or so years, and I don't feel it has in some way hindered my job searches. So I think that's up to you personally. I think personally that it is nice to have it because it gives people something to look at, kind of to anchor again in that pile of CVs. This is Essie, I remember her face. And it's something, in my opinion, sometimes quite anchoring. So it's like, oh, I remember the face that looked like this, had these types of skills that I want to look at again, and then it's easy to find your CV again. So just a few tips with that. It should be kind of a professional type of photo, professionally kind of curated, not a Facebook photo type of thing. Yeah, that's my input on that.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Great, thank you. If it's okay, Marike, I'm going to take one more question before we move on.
Sure.
So Latifa from WITS, you've raised your hand for the question.
Hi, good morning, everybody. So I just wanted to know, with regards to recommendation letters or character recommendation letters, if that's something that you recommend to add onto your CV.
It's a difficult question in the sense that certain jobs or certain employers ask for different things. So in the job ad, sometimes they will say they want a recommendation letter. I know specifically at WITS, when I applied to come work at WITS, they didn't ask for those types of things, but they asked for references. And each one of those references, the university then contacted, and they asked, because they have a specific format with questions, kind of that does become like a recommendation letter. So look at the job ad specifically. It doesn't hurt to add it, except if they say they want a short CV, then don't add it. But you can always add that these at the bottom, you can have a section of other documents available upon request, and then you can have recommendation letters, valid driver's license, those types of things, if that they are not asked for to attach to your application.
Great, thank you. And thank you for the question. Marike, thank you so much. Latifa says thank you as well. At this point, I'd like to ask to hand over to Caz, who will continue with the second part of our presentation today.
Super. Thanks very much, Diane, and thanks, Marike, for setting the scene for the second half of our discussion, where we're going to look at a worked example of a CV. So hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm going to take us through a worked example for a fake person that we've made up for the purposes of this discussion, Mr. Joe Blogg. And he's going to be applying, in this case, for an academic position. Now, I realize that not all of you are currently looking for academic positions going forward. So obviously, as Marike's already mentioned previously, the most important thing when putting your CV together is to tailor it for the job that you're applying for. So that's really critical. She's already mentioned you tailor it specifically for where it's going. So obviously in this example we go through, this is really tailored for an academic setting. And keep that in mind if you are applying, for example, to industry or corporate setting, they might not be interested in your publications. And in actual fact, they probably don't really care about those. That's not what they're looking for. They're probably looking very much more for skills. So if you really feel like, I mean, if you're lucky enough to have a Nature publication and you want to make sure it's in there, make sure it's not the most prominent thing, because understand the audience who's going to look at this, which is probably the recruiter or the HR officer at the place you're applying to, they're going to be looking for their key things. So I think the take home really by the end of this is going to be that you need to be putting your CV together for what they want. Whilst the CV is all about you, this exercise is really not about you, in the way it's about you giving them what they want to see, to then be able to go, yes, this is somebody I'd like to call in an interview because they sound like a good fit for our company. So if we can then go on to the next slide, we're going to have a look in a bit more detail at the biographical information that you would need to include. So in this example, what's quite important to note here is that Mr. Jonathan Bloggs actually goes by the name Joe. So he's indicated that quite clearly up front, and when HR do need to contact you, it's very easy for them to see that actually you prefer to be called Joe as opposed to Jonathan. Things that are important to be included in the biographical details section are things like your ID or passport number as a person identifier, but also if you happen to be a researcher, something like an ORCID number, which you may or may not yet be aware of, would be a critical thing to include in your CV. This would be a link that would take people to your personal page that would have information about your publications, conference presentations. This is important to include a link to if you are applying for an academic position, because often there are restrictions on the length of the CV that you can submit. So sometimes, you know, you're asked to submit a CV of not more than 3 pages. My recommendation there is follow what they want. They've been very clear in saying they don't want long and lengthy things. So don't attach in that instance, you know, the certificate for a first aid course you did 2 years ago, if it's not relevant and they haven't asked for it. Rather keep that back, give them exactly what they want up front. And then if they're interested in calling you back, they'll then say, could you please send me the certificate for your first aid course for the health and safety position you're applying for, if they want to confirm that information. The ORCID number also gives you an opportunity to link additional information that you might not be able to fit into those, for example, 3 pages. But it's there if they want to look further, they can then go to your webpage and they can delve a little bit more into who you are and what your skills, etc. might be. The next section that I'm going to focus on is obviously in the biographical section, race and gender, and things like marital status. We frequently get questions like, should I put these things into my application? Does it make sense to say that, for example, to give a controversial example, I'm a white male and I happen to be applying for a position that is indicated as a transformation equity position. So because of my biographical situation, I might not be likely to get the job. My sense in this instance is always be upfront and disclose that information, because at the end of the day, you don't want to waste the recruiter's time or the company's time. And actually, they don't want to waste yours. They don't want to call you in and interview you for an hour and bring in 7 people to be on the panel to interview you. And it's much easier if they can say up front, unfortunately, this person doesn't match the criteria for this job. We're going to have to put them aside. So whilst you can include that information, I would recommend that you do, unless you feel really strongly against it, in which case, obviously, the decision is very much up to you. Place and date of birth, that's often important. Place of birth is often important for your nationality, so please do indicate that. And also, as mentioned in the nationality section here, if you do have a work permit and you aren't, for example, in our case, a South African national, If you have South African permanent residency, you should indicate that because it allows you opportunity to work in the country. And if you have a work permit for a specific thing, and this is an important one to note, if you have a work or a study permit, it only allows you to work or study in that particular area. So if you have, for example, a work permit to be a postdoctoral fellow, but your fellowship is ending and you're applying to be a lecturer, having a work permit to be a fellow doesn't give you permission to be a lecturer. You would then have to reapply for a new work permit specifically for the new company in the new role. So those things are really important if you aren't a South African national. Important things to include are things like the languages you speak, and also more importantly, if you have done certification on these, it's good to put in the international certification standards if you do have a CEF reference level for the kind of language studies you've done. And you'll see in this example, Joe Bloggs is English mother tongue, speaks Afrikaans very well, has some good German and basic Italian. So they've very clearly indicated what their skill and ability in those languages are. It's really important to then also include information, your cell phone number, your email address. And quite frequently what happens is we get somebody who might be a student and they put their student email address in here, but then they leave the university because they've graduated and your contact details are now null and void. So if the company tries to get hold of you, they can't actually reach you because the information is out of date. So please, if you do have a time limited email address that will end at the end of your current position, please rather make sure that you do create yourself a Gmail, a Yahoo, a Hotmail account that is then exists for longer than the period of the current institution you're based at. And then also if you do have a driver's license and if you happen to have your own vehicle, especially if you're looking for something like a sales rep job, having things like your own vehicle are important for those roles. So those things are important to indicate here because it helps the company understand that you would be able to perform the. So going on to our next slide, we're going to be talking about academic qualifications and affiliations. Again, this is a worked example for Mr. Joe Bloggs who's applying for an academic position. So it's important here that he has listed his previous degrees. And that's really important because when the HR officer does the quick scan of the CV, they're going to look at what the role requires. So in the advert, they may have indicated they want somebody with a master's in a health science related field or in a biological field, and they'll immediately screen the academic qualifications. And when I say that, it'll really be a 5 to 10 second glance and go, yes, this person has an MSc in biochemistry, tick, they meet that first criteria, let's look at the next criteria as we go on. So it's really important to make sure that that information is clearly visible in terms of what they ask for in the job requirements section, so that the HR officer can quickly scan and go, yes, these things have been met, and carry on. Other professional qualifications and courses you may have done can also be included here. So these might not necessarily be your academic domain, like your biochemistry, your mathematics, etc. But this could be additional things you've done on the side. So you might have done some data science courses, some ethics courses, project management, first aid, occupational health and safety related things. All of these would be able to fall into this section. And remembering again that if you are limited for space, you want to make sure that you select carefully the things that you want to include here, because what you want to do is make sure that you are giving the best foot forward in terms of association, whatever your field might be. Make sure that you go ahead and affiliate to have membership with them sooner rather than at the last minute, the day before you're busy applying for your CV. You think, oh, I better quickly register with SAM so that people know that I'm a member of that organization. Then going on to work experience in our next slide. In terms of work experience, depending on what is asked for, you would fill out this section with an appropriate amount of information. In this case, all that has been indicated are the 4 previous jobs in a chronological order, the position that the person held, the name of the department and the university, and the dates. Something that is really important to add into your CV for each job that you list. If you leave the job, it's important to list why you left. In some cases, if people don't fill that in, you'll find that the committee actually asks, oh, I see you've had 4 jobs in the last X amount of years. 4 jobs in 2 years is a lot. Why did you leave your job so rapidly and move on to the next thing? This is also because, HR often don't want to go through a very lengthy process to hire someone, only to have you stay in a position for 3 to 6 months. And, if it is because you're only taking on short-term contracts, then it's important to list the reason you left was because the contract ended, not because you just decided, I've had 6 months of this and I'm done and I'm going to try something else. So really those are important. And also if you have gaps in your CV, Marike touched on this earlier in the first half of the talk, it's really important to include, if you have an extended gap, why there was a gap of no service for a lengthy period. It could be that you went on a gap year, you decided to take a sabbatical, change direction, and you wanted to travel the world. More than fine. If you don't include it, you'll probably find someone in the panel will interrogate it at an interview stage if you get to interview. So if you can include it, if you've got the space, then just give a brief indication, this particular year traveling abroad. And that would be more than sufficient. On our next slide. This is obviously being again tailored towards the academic CV. It's important to include the outputs that this particular person has put together. So in this case, you would include things like peer-reviewed publications. You would also include things like conference outputs. So if you happen to have gone to many conferences and presented, and also if you have other academic related skills, because in this example, we're talking about an academic CV, you may have reviewed manuscripts for various journals. You may have co-edited proceedings of conferences, been involved in typesetting and preparing academic books. There is a whole suite of things that you could add at this point that would be relevant when you were specifically looking for a job in academia. In our next slide. Here we would then go on to add in the skills that one would have that would be relevant again to the academic position being applied for. So really, this is where Marike already answered in the question session we had earlier. Things like project management skills, data science related skills, like various packages you can use, software, programming languages that you're proficient in. What I would recommend people who do include things like I've got skills in Word, or I can program in whatever, whichever package, etc. you're using. Try to make sure that if it's something you're not particularly good at but you can use, then try and indicate that you can use it on a very basic level. So you might have things that you're good at in the same way as the spoken languages we mentioned previously. Try and give an indication of, I have an advanced skill in this programming language, but I have a basic skill in this programming language. It would be terrible if you went into an interview as Mr. Joe Blogg, claiming you could use C++, R, and Python, for example. And in the interview, they ask you a question related specifically to one of those, and you're not in a position to answer it because it's the one you know to a lesser degree, but you know the other two really well, but you didn't indicate that on your CV. So then by answering the one that you don't know very well with a bit of hesitation and you're not really sure, it makes the panel think that, well, then clearly they don't know the others as well. Whereas if you'd indicated, these are the two I know well, and maybe this is the one I don't really know very well, then at least they can interrogate those questions in the interview and ask you those questions relative to your skill set and what your claims in your CV are. Something else that's also, I find quite important, and it also leads to Marike's comments about whether you do or don't include a photo that Latifa asked about earlier. I always suggest and recommend that people include something about their interests or their hobbies. Again, like the photo, it just humanizes the CV a little bit, and it makes it that little bit more personal for the HR officer to then just remember maybe one tiny thing extra about you versus everybody else. Remembering, of course, that in some cases, HR officers are dealing with, they're hiring for multiple positions in a given week. And for example, at WITS last year, there was a position that was open for a secretarial position, and there were 450 applications received for that one job. Now, to give you an indication, if an HR officer has to read all 450 just to do these basic checks, do they have the masters in biochemistry? Have they published a paper? And can they use, I don't know, Python, for example? Just to do those 3 checks on 450 CVs for one job is a really onerous task that takes a lot of time. Because you don't, as the HR officer, want to skip somebody out, so you have to be thorough, but that is time consuming. So really that hint that when people spend time on your CV, they only get a few seconds, that's really because of the nature of the scope of the amount of applications that do come in. Again, why it's so important to tailor your CV for what the person, the employer, is looking for. And then in the last section that I've highlighted here, the referees section. In lots of job applications adverts, they ask you to give a list of referees. So this just means you don't have to get a special letter from them. You just have to name 3 people who the university or the hiring entity can contact, and they will contact them directly. They won't go through you. They will contact these people directly and ask, referee number 1, could you give us, here's our form, could you answer these questions about this candidate who's listed you as a referee for their job. It's really important here that we include both an email and a phone number, just because of the nature of getting hold of people. Sometimes, especially if someone's getting a lot of emails, if you phone and say there's something quite urgent, could you please have a look for this one email and attend to it? That really helps, because sometimes the time frame for these to be sent in is quite short. So that's really important. And what is also important to include is the relationship between yourself and the referee. And my recommendation is always that you should include people with differing relationships to you. So maybe one is a supervisor from your most recent degree. So you are applying for a job as a lecturer, and so it would be your PhD supervisor. One could be you did some volunteering, so it was the person who you reported to at the particular entity where you were volunteering, so your boss there. And one could be maybe a lecturer, a colleague in another team that you've worked in, or it could just be a character reference. This person is a friend. It's important that you disclose that up front, so that also when the responses come in, the responses can be read by the HR officer through the lens of, okay, referee number 1, Professor Joe Soap, had this kind of working relationship with Mr. Joe Blogg, who's applying for this job. So that's really important to include. Very important for referees is that you must please always ask their permission to include them as a referee beforehand. And I'll tell you why that's so important. One of the things that's quite problematic is if you think, I'll just put down my supervisor for, or my course lecturer from when I did first year mathematics. That course lecturer might not remember you. Or they might not necessarily have a good memory of you. It's really important to ask people, are they willing to be a referee, to get a sense of whether they're willing to write something that is positive. It would be terrible if you went through the process, got shortlisted, got interviews, and they asked for referees' reports for you. And the referee wrote in and said, oh, this person is terrible. They never got their work done on time. It was hugely problematic working with this person. So it's really important that you approach these people and ask them, are they willing to give a reference for you for job X? And if they say yes, then I would suggest that you email them a copy of your CV up front, because there's nothing worse for a recruiter that they phone somebody, and let's say it was your first year maths lecturer, And all that person can say is, yes, I know the person, they were in my class. Quickly, let me check on my university platform. Oh yes, that person got 63% for their course. I don't remember them more than that. That's all I can really tell you about them. So it's really about making sure that you position your referees to be able to back up your claims in your CV. And if you had asked your referee and they say, yes, I'll give a reference, and you send them your CV, when that recruiter phones them, you've already pre-armed them with information. The referee can say, oh, they were in my first year class, but I do know that they have skills in programming languages and they can use C++, R, and Python. You've already armed them with all that information for the recruiter or the HR officer who contacts them. And in some cases, the referee might even ask you for, you know, some recent stuff you've done, or by the way, what's your most recent publication or your most recent contribution to a certain thing, because that will help me put you in a better light. If somebody's willing to take the time and effort to do a reference for you, you know, they 9 times out of 10 want to support you. They want to help you get that job in that position. So arm them with everything that they will need to be able to put your best foot forward on your behalf. If we can go to our next slide, please. So we've reached the end of the discussion of the slides. I am mindful of time, but that's more than fine. I'm happy to take questions for as many as we do have. I just do want to please just reiterate, if you can maybe just indicate by raise if you have questions. But again, just a last point to reiterate, all applications and CVs that are submitted need to be tailor-made for the company that they're going to. There really isn't a one-size-fits-all approach, as much as we would love it. Because again, we are writing and tailoring what we submit for the audience because we want them to pick us. We really want them to say, yes, I'm going to pick you as the one of 5 people that we're going to interview out of that batch of 450 people that applied. So it's really about putting your best foot forward and making sure that you give them everything you can to allow them to make the decision to say, yes, I'm going to put Joe Bloggs into the yes pile and we're going to interview him further. So in terms of people who are older, so you're not applying for a position where you are coming into the role straight out of your first degree, for example, you know, maybe you've taken some time off to get married, to start a family, whatever the case may be. I don't think that employers necessarily discriminate against that. I think it is important that you just indicate that in your CV when you are applying. So if you have a period where you have an absence from any particular sort of chronological place, so you worked first and then for a while you didn't and you're coming back, if you can just indicate that on your CV, I took time out to start a family, I took time out to travel abroad, etc. Those things will just help give the panel that are interviewing you a sense of why you weren't potentially working for that period of time, the 5 years that you maybe took time out to have children, etc., those kind of things. So I think obviously all employers, they're, you know, they might sound scary. The HR people might seem scary when they're interviewing you because you don't know if you're saying the right thing. But remember at the end of the day that the people who are sitting on those panels who are interviewing you and looking at your CVs and things, they are people too. They've got their own families at home who they go home to, you know, they may have had opportunities to travel abroad, etc. And may have very much walked the same path as you have. So don't be afraid to include things like that, especially if you took a break and you're only coming back to academia and then you're going to continue with your academic environment or lifestyle beyond that. Please feel free to include that information. You know, I can't really think of a situation where an employer would view that negatively. Unless, for example, you know, I'm trying to think of you're a personal assistant to someone and they want you at their side every waking moment to do their dry cleaning, you know, that kind of thing, where they want somebody who's single because they want somebody who doesn't have a family commitment at home where you need to go home and be available. So really, I think, you know, if you disclose that information, then you've already allowed the employer the opportunity to decide, do we want to take somebody on in this particular situation? It's really important to understand, though, that, you know, HR and interview panels need to be consistent when they're interviewing candidates. So if they ask candidate number one, who they've interviewed, a set of questions, they need to be fair and give other people the opportunity to answer the same questions, because they need to make their decision based on fairness. So if they're going to ask you in an interview about your personal situation for whatever reason, whether they should or shouldn't, that's up to their policies. They should be asking the same questions of everybody that they're interviewing on that given day.
What I've got is more, it might be more of a comment, but I just found it very interesting, this idea of highlighting yourself, and you sort of called it humanizing yourself, by maybe including a photograph or something like that. I don't know if you or anyone in our audience has any advice on how to kind of boost that idea. So this idea of really like profiling yourself, standing out from the crowd.
Sure. Diane, maybe one comment that I can just add to that as well. You know, especially in this day and age with so much use of technology, there is always an element of cyber vetting that goes on in the background, or there can be, not always, but there can be. It is not unusual for HR or the person who would be hiring you to, for example, look at your LinkedIn profile, look at your ORCID profile if you're applying for a researcher job, you know, that kind of thing. Does this person have a crazy Facebook page where they are, you know, have lots of photos that make them seem wild and unruly? This is something we need to think about in terms of our own data privacy and what we put out there onto the web. Just to give you a very simple example, you know, if I was hiring Mr. Joe Blogg, and I wanted to know more about him because I felt the CV was maybe a bit short, then probably the first thing I would do is Google Mr. Joe Blogg. So I would type in his name into Google and see what comes up. In terms of humanizing yourself and making your profile better and building your brand, it's important that what you put out onto the cyber platforms are what you want people to see first. So if you're applying for a researcher job, make sure you've got that ORCID profile so that when someone Googles you, the first thing they come across is your ORCID profile and not, you know, a photograph from Facebook where you were partying at 2 in the because that wouldn't be conducive to the brand you're trying to build. So that's really important. Cyber vetting does happen in various industries. So that's something to keep in mind, because what's available for you on your e-profile on the web is something that is a potential resource to people who are looking to hire you. So just keep that in mind, and maybe as an outcome from today, go and Google yourself and see what is available as the first set of hits for you on your particular web profile. And maybe consider creating your own ORCID ID, and making sure that in future when people do Google you, that's one of the first things that comes up when people search for you. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Caz. I'm mindful of time. Caz, are you happy to take a question?
I am. No problem.
Thanks. We've got Monique from WITS has raised her hand. Monique, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, thank you so much. I wanted to ask, especially with people who have a bit of a more sparse CV, would it be appropriate to include any special achievements and honors that you've received?
Yes, so thanks for the question, Monique. It is, again, if you are tailoring it to something where that award is appropriate, then by all means include it. You know, if you think about it from a chronological point of view, you might not want to be including, you know, maybe when you won the spelling bee in grade 2, because that would be too far removed, even though you might have a bit of a sparse CV. But something that's linked and relevant to your field that you're applying for would certainly be a good thing to add as an accolade. So provided it's, you know, recent and relevant, I think would be good things to include.
Great, thank you, Caz, and thank you, Monique, for the question.